Welcome to the first lesson of our CCNA course. In this lesson, we are going to explore the following CLI commands. So totally we have 18 commands. Let's start. Before we start, we are going to add a network cloud connection, which is my home network in our case, and let's call it internet. And we are going to add two more nodes from CISCO, IOL. One of them will be May 2018 router with default settings. Let's call it R1 and say save. And another one will be layer 3 switch, IOL. And the layer 3 switch or layer 2 switch and layer 3 switch at the same time will be high iron from 2019. And let's change the label to switch 1. And also let's change the icon to something which look like a switch but not the router. For example, this one. And say save with default settings. Then we will connect the router to the internet. Router will be connected to Ethernet port 0/0. And we will connect R1 to the switch. Router will be connected via port Ethernet 0, let's say 3 to the switch, and the switch will be connected to the router via port Ethernet 0/0. So now we have internet connectivity, we have a router R1, and we have a switch. And let's start the devices so that we can console to the CLI and do some coding. We right click and say start. And we also right click on the switch and say start. Then we click again on the router to open the CLI of the router. And we click on the switch to open CLI of the switch. If we press enter inside the switch 1 CLI, we will see that it is already booted. The first command that we are going to use is the command enable. By dialing command enable, we will move from exec mode to the privilege mode. Actually, the difference between the privilege mode and the exec mode is that in exec mode you are like a read-only user. Even though you are read-only user, you cannot read many things and you cannot execute anything. In enable mode, it's like you are an admin and you can do whatever you want. The first command that we are going to explore after we in the enable mode is to change the name of the switch from switch to, let's say, SW1. And we say configure terminal. Now, as you can see, we are switched from privilege mode to the configuration mode, and in the parentheses you see this config writing. It means that we shifted our switch to the global configuration mode. In global configuration mode, we can configure global settings. There are also non-global configuration mode, like interface configuration mode, where we configure specific interfaces of the switch. In the global configuration mode, we can change, let's say, the switch name by saying host name to SW1 and press enter. As you can see here, the switch name was changed to SW1. If we want to save the new configuration, which is currently only running in the RAM of the switch, to the switch file system so that it will be available even after the switch will be rebooted, we should say do write. And we can see that the configuration is being written to the switch. Let's do something similar with the router. We say enable mode. We say configure terminal. We say host name, let's say to R1. And as you can see, the name of the router was changed from router to R1. And let's also save it with saying do write. Now we can check the currently running configuration in the router by saying show running configuration. Or we can say do show run. Because we are in the configuration mode, it's not allowing us to execute commands which should be executed in the privilege mode. If we want to execute commands which belong to privilege mode, but in configuration mode, we should say do before our command, and we set do show run. Do show run, and now we see our running configuration. We see that our host name is R1 now. And the rest configuration which is running is default. There is an interesting default configuration for the Ethernet 0.0 that it has an IP address set to the DHCP. Let's check if it got its IP address from the internet. Let's say show IP interface brief. Or we should say do show IP interface brief. And we can see that our router has acquired an IP address on Ethernet port 0.0, which is this one. And it has acquired from the DHCP service, which is running in the internet cloud. In this case, this internet cloud is my home network. And its status is up. And the port is up. Let's try to ping something in the internet. Ping, let's say 8.8.8.8, which will fail because we are still in the configuration mode. Let's exit from the configuration mode. And now we are in the privilege mode. Let's say again ping. Let's say google.com. And as you can see, we are able to ping even google.com. It means that our router has not only the IP address subnet mask default gateway, but also has a DNS IP address, which it can query to resolve these google.com names. Let's look for the other commands that we need to explore. Enable command we have already explored. Let's explore disable command. Let's say on the switch, if we exit and go to the privilege mode, we can say disable, enter, and then we return back to the exec mode. In the exec mode, we don't have too many functionalities. If we dial the question mark, we can see that in the exec mode, the number of commands actually not small, but they are still limited. But if we move to enable mode, and again question mark, we can see that the number of commands is huge and more advanced ones. Next, the configuration terminal we already explored. Host name we already changed it. Interface type, port number. This one we can explore via the router. let's say configure terminal. Let's say interface. In our case, it was Ethernet 0/0. And we can say no IP address DHCP. In this case, we have logged into the CLI to the configuration mode as a general here. Then we shifted to the configuration mode of the interface, and we can see that the configuration mode has changed to the config IF, which means configure interface. And then we said, I don't want to have any IP addresses on my Ethernet 0/0 interface assigned by the DHCP. And now we can show if this is the reality. Do show IP interface brief, and we can see that the IP address is still assigned and the interface name is Ethernet 0/0. Let's try again. Yeah. So the command which should be executed is no IP address. We don't need to specify the DHCP. In this case, we specify that we don't want to see any IP addresses on our Ethernet 0/0 interface. And as you can see here, the status is that the interface is up, but there is no any IP address assigned. Okay, let's exit the configuration mode. The exit command moves you back to the next higher mode in the configuration mode. Let's go back to the interface configuration mode and explore one more command. Now we are back to the interface configuration mode, and let's explore command end. Let's dial end. End will bring you directly to the privilege mode. So end says exits configuration mode and goes back to the enable mode from any of the configuration submodes. So end command is useful if you want to jump directly to the privilege mode. Next command is the command Ctrl-Z. This is a command. This is not a command, but rather a 2K combination, pressing the Ctrl and the Z letter that together do the same thing as end. Let's check. We say configure terminal, then we say interface 0/0, and then I press here Ctrl-Z, and as you can see, I jump back to the privilege mode. Show running config we already explored. Show startup config. Startup config is a configuration which will be started up when you reboot your router or power on your router. Let's see our show running config, show run. And as you can see, our host name is R1, and our Ethernet interface should not have any DHCP settings assigned. As you can see, it has no IP address. Let's save this by saying write. And now let's change the name of the router from R1 to R2. And we say configure terminal. And then we say host name, and we say R2. But we don't save it to the startup config. I mean, we don't say do write or copy running configuration to startup configuration. And now let's check show startup config. Or first of all, let's check show running config again. Let's say do show run without jumping to the privilege mode. And we can see that the host name is R2. Now let's ask the system to show us the startup config. And we say do show startup config. And we can see that the startup config has the hostname of R1 instead of R2. Why? Because we didn't save our current configuration to the router. What does it mean? It means that if we reboot the router now, we will get after reboot the hostname instead of R2, we will get it as R1, because after reboot, the system will read the router name from the startup configuration, and we just explored that in the startup configuration we have R1 instead of R2. What we are going to do now, we are going to reload the router. Let's say reload, which is equivalent to reboot. The system is asking if we want to save it. We say no on purpose, no. So we had R2, and after the router is rebooted, we should see the router name as R1. The copy running configuration to startup configuration is the similar configuration which you can use instead of write. Write is actually an old command used on the CISCO routers and switch. It is still supported. It's very short. That's why I try to use something which is more convenient than writing this copy run config to startup config. But as an official exam question, you will most probably face this configuration, which is a long version. Okay, let's see. The system is being booted, and as you can see, it's booted to R1, not R2. Why? Because the startup config contained R1 as a host name, and our running configuration had R2 as a host name. But due to the reason that we didn't save our running configuration to the startup configuration, after reboot or power failure, you will get loaded only the configuration which is stored in the startup. Next command that we can use is quit. Quit actually quits completely the terminal. You see? If, for example, you have had a Telnet or SSH connection, you will be completely disconnected and will have to log in again. But in our case, because we are connected from the console, which is an emulated serial connection, we are being connected back again, but not in the privilege mode, but in the exec mode. So that if we write enable, we will move back into the privilege mode. Next command that we are going to explore is line console 0. This command is available only in the configuration mode. We say line. Then we can say question mark and choose console. Then again question mark, and there is only one option, 0. And as you can see, the R1 configuration changed to config line. What does it mean? It means that now we are going to configure our serial port configuration. Let's see what are the options available. And as you can see, there is a huge number of parameters available for the serial interface. We want to configure password. Let's see in the help if we have this kind of command. Yes, we have, as you can see, we have password set as password. Let's say password, and let's say 111, and say enter. Then we use another command in configuration line console 0 mode. We say login. Login command is used to force the router or the switch to prompt you next time the password that we have used here. The password is 111. If we don't say login, the system will just record the password, but it will be useless unless you ask the router to use it for next logins via console. Let's check. Let's say do write. Let's save it to the router configuration, and then we say quit. It looks like we are not able to quit from the config line. We just say then end, and then we say quit. So quit is going to throw us out of the console line configuration, but because we are connected physically to the router via console line, it will prompt for the password. And as you can see here, it says R1 con is now available. Press return to get started. User access verification. So we don't have a username, we just have a password, which is 1111. Looks like I'm not typing 111. Enter. I dialed something wrong and it's asking me again to dial the password. And let's say 111, enter. And as you can see, if I inputted my password correctly, I'm in the exec mode. I say enable and I'm back into the privilege mode. Let's say show running config. We say show run and we can see that we have a hostname of R1. What else do we have as an interesting changes? The Ethernet is no more configured for the DHCP client access. But we have line console 0 set for the password of 111 and the password is not encrypted. So whoever can get to the privilege mode and say show running configuration, he will be able to see the password of the console line 0. Next command that we are going to explore is write erase, erase startup config or erase NVRAM. This command is used to delete the startup configuration. What does it mean? It means that after we execute this command, let's try to execute it. Let's say write erase. After we execute this command, the password configuration and the R1 hostname configuration will be removed from the startup configuration and we will get a blank router. Let's check. The system stays erasing the NVRAM file system will remove all configuration files. Continue. We say yes. And let's check again the show running config. As you can see in the show run config, we have hostname R1. And we have a password on the console of 111, but let's check what we have in the configuration of startup. We say show startup config. And as you can see, the startup config is not present. If we reboot the router now, we will lose all our configuration. Let's check. Reload, enter, confirm. Now you can see that the router is being rebooted. By the way, as you can see, this router has an image of 2018. So it's not that old, but not the latest one. The system is still being booted. Yes, and the system has been booted. And as you can see, we are in the exec mode and the router name is router. And if we shift to the enable mode and say show run, you will see that the running config has a host name of router1. And if we move to the bottom of the configuration where in the previous show run execution we saw the console 0 password values, now we will not see. Plus, as you can see, the Ethernet 0-0 has an IP address of DHCP as a default, which we removed previously, but now it's came back again. as a default configuration. And as you can see, the line console 0 just has a parameter of logging synchronous, and there is no any password. Let's see if this is the reality. Let's say quit. It says router console 0 is now available. Press return to get started. We press and it's not asking us any password. We just say enable and we are back to the privilege mode. That's all what I wanted to show you in this first lesson. If you have any question, you can ask them in the comments section of the video. See you on the next lesson.